Hey Unwrappers, Ollie here. Before we get going, I'm here to let you know that this week's show is brought to you in part by IG. IG offers a range of investment products, whether you're an active share trader or prefer to have your portfolio managed on your behalf. They want you to be the most informed you can be when investing, so they offer educational resources and tools available 24/7. And with access to over 70 key US stocks outside of normal trading hours and zero commission on US stocks if you trade 3 or more times in the previous month, you're primed to make the best of any opportunity. Note, market liquidity can be lower and spreads wider compared to main session trading. If you want to find out more, search IG Investments. The value of shares, ETFs and ETCs can fall as well as rise, which could mean getting back less than you originally put in. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday the 19th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Donald Trump confirming he will run for president again, a missile landing in Poland, briefly stoking fears NATO was under attack from Russia, and England winning the T20 World Cup for the second time after beating Pakistan by a tense 5 wickets. You can read more about all of that in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Kate Samuelson. From daily podcast Today in History with the Retrospectors, it's Arion McNicoll. And from the refugee podcast Integrate That, Mr. Abdulwahab Tahhan. And Kate, thank you for all the heated discussions we've been having behind the scenes about our menu choices for the week's staff Christmas party in a few weeks' time. I've gone salmon beef tart. Producer Sophie is salmon mushroom Wellington Christmas pudding. I don't think I took the time to ask you what you'd be eating, and I wonder if I should.
Thanks, Ollie, for putting me on the spot like that. I think I went for salmon mushroom Wellington tart.
Classic. Abdul, I'm sorry you're missing out, but it would cost us a lot to wire it over to you.
I'll be having kebab and I'm Arab. Give me all the meat.
I would so have a kebab rather than a tart. But anyway, Abdul, you are up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The hunger strike was not successful.
The British-Egyptian pro-democracy activist Alaa Abdel Fattah has spent most of the past decade behind bars. He was a major figure in Egypt's January 25th revolution back in 2011. He has since been charged with violating protest laws and spreading false information. And to protest his imprisonment, he has been on hunger strike for over 200 days.
Ahmed Shehab Eldin reporting for The Stream on Al Jazeera on Tuesday. Abdul, who was he talking about?
So he was talking about Alaa Abdel Fattah, a British-Egyptian activist who's been in prison for most of the past decades in Egypt for just being an activist politically, for being one of the people who were kind of the leaders of the 25th January revolution against the previous Egyptian president.
Which was in 2011, wasn't it?
Which was in 2011, Hosni Mubarak. So he was in prison there. Then he was out of prison. And then he was put in prison back again for sharing a Facebook post about the treatment of prisoners in prison. And there was a term that was used by Egyptian activists about the political prisoners that they coined the term recycle, in which they recycle all those prisoners back to prison for various reasons. So once you finish your sentence, they put you back in prison again. So Abdel Fattah was released in 2019 for a very short period of time, and he was sentenced again to 5 more years just for sharing a post on Facebook.
Okay, but what's happened this week?
So this week, he decided to end his hunger strike, which started in April. Because he thought he was treated unjustly. He was sentenced in a very unjust way for something we take in the West for granted, sharing a tweet or a Facebook post. Before the show started, we were talking about Twitter and we were talking about Facebook. And this is something that we all take for granted. Nobody thinks about sharing something and posting something and then going to prison for it. But obviously in such third world countries or Arabic countries, Egypt is known for being the third worst country for sending journalists to prison. There are over 65,000 prisoners political prisoners in Egypt. But of course, this number is challenged by Sisi's government.
And Arion, we have a role in this story as well, don't we? In Britain, I mean, because he is, as Abdul said at the top, a part British citizen.
Yeah, that's right. So in April, just days after he obtained his British citizenship while he was behind bars, which came to him via his mother, who was born in the UK, that was when he went on this hunger strike, partly to sort of put pressure on the British government to try to advocate his case, particularly at COP27, which this year was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And I think, you know, on one level, there was the potential for that to at least embarrass El-Sisi and the Egyptian government. And certainly Rishi Sunak turned up to COP27 and made the right noises in a fairly sort of muted and limited way, it must be said. And I think part of why it's a difficult question, even though some dual nationals have been released by the Egyptian government under pressure from foreign governments, is that in the case of Abdel Fattah, his citizenship is a little bit more tenuous and distant. And I suppose for that reason, at least to date, El-Sisi and his government haven't even acknowledged that he is a citizen of somewhere else. And so they haven't even taken that first step towards recognition of the idea that he could be eligible for release, let alone releasing him.
Yeah, I didn't realize his citizenship had come to him so recently, Kate. I mean, obviously, on the one hand, he's obviously legitimately entitled to that because of his mother, as Arion was saying. But on the other hand, you can understand, knowing that, a feeling that he's kind of gaming the system to make a point, which he's doing successfully. But you can understand why the British authorities are concerned about how they get involved in this international dispute with an ally.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, though, that it's not just Rishi Sunak who's been speaking about the release of Fattah, but also the governments, the leaders of the US, France, Germany as well, were all putting moderate amounts of pressure on during COP27. But actually, I would say that Abdel Fattah has thought he's almost become a sort of symbol of all the 65,000 estimated political prisoners in Egypt at the moment. So while we're talking about one individual and his personal story and his hunger strike, he's really symbolic of a huge problem in Egypt at the moment and all these thousands of people who've been arrested for opposing the government.
I mean, I think a lot of people, Abdul, would be surprised by that number, 65,000 political prisoners. Because I guess when you think of the Middle East, you think of Egypt even now as one of the, I mean, it's about context, obviously, but one of the more liberal places within the Middle East. I think people all around the world perhaps don't realize the extent of political prisoners there.
I think a lot of people in the West or in Europe and the United States would think this of Egypt. I'm really surprised that the number is only 65,000 and not more than that. And they're still alive, some of them, to be honest with you, because we know a lot of people go to prison in the Middle East and they disappear. You never know about anything about them. The family of Abdel Fattah, Ala Abdel Fattah, didn't know if he was still alive. Even Rishi Sunak, when he arrived in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, didn't know if Ala Abdel Fattah was still alive or not. And this is really awful. Egypt is one of the worst places for women because of the sexual harassment there. And there are a couple of studies showing that. So there are a lot of things people don't know about Egypt. But this is not an excuse for world leaders not to talk about it and not to bring real pressure. The United States give $1.3 billion in military aid for Egypt. That's the second country that receives aid after Israel, and that's before Jordan. So it is not acceptable for all these leaders to be buddy-buddy with the president and looking very, very cozy during the summit and not bring in this person. And which brings another point, that is it because he's Egyptian British? He's not really 100% white British. Do we have two-tier system of citizens in England? And this brings the story of Nazanin Zaghari, the British Iranian who was imprisoned for since 2016. And Boris Johnson even made it worse, alleging that she was a journalist when she clearly wasn't a journalist. So I think world leaders should do their part because, as you said, he's a symbol now. And a lot of people around the world were protesting for him. Even Greta didn't go to Egypt, saying, I don't want to go to a country.
Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, she said, I didn't want to go to a country where they have very bad human rights record.
Well, I mean, I suppose Egypt's intention of the way they were hosting COP this year, Arion, rather like Qatar and the World Cup and the discussions they've been having around that, is to improve their image on an international stage. Do you think it's worked? I mean, let's park this issue that Abdul's brought up, things people didn't say. Looking at things people did say, the world leaders did go. Has this improved the image of Egypt?
No, I don't think so. I think that this case is actually a really big part of it, though I think the sort of general state of slight under-preparation of COP27 and, the image that emerged from it was of a conference that was taking place in difficult circumstances anyway, against the backdrop of everything that's unfolded in 2022 and the fact that countries that previously might have been more collaborative didn't want to see eye to eye quite as easily as they might have the last time round. But I think also there was this air of slight under-preparation. And also I think this whole story hung over the conference as well. And I think that previously a lot of people may not have been aware of the severity of political oppression within Egypt. And I think a lot of people might have seen El-Sisi maybe the way even much of the West has done, which is a little bit of a return to stability. A benign dictator, I think, is the way that Mubarak was viewed by the West. And I think that the sort of Muslim Brotherhood period for many countries was something that looked like a potential chaotic anomaly that maybe Sisi swept in and just brought things back to a place that the West could be happy with, as long as no one looks too carefully at what's going on in the country. And guess what? COP brought that kind of attention to them, and that has probably been quite uncomfortable for El-Sisi.
If that's true, Kate, do you think it'll have an impact on international tourism? Because, Brits don't go on holiday generally to Iran and Syria unless they have a reason to be there. But they do go to Turkey, they do go to Israel, they do go to Egypt. Sharm el-Sheikh is a popular holiday resort, isn't it? Like the UAE. Is this going to be the moment where people think ethically, I don't want to go there?
Yeah, it's a hugely popular holiday destination. I think there are lots of kind of British package holidays that go direct to Sharm el-Sheikh. And I do think that the protesters in Egypt and also around the world did an amazing job of raising awareness of human rights abuse in this country around COP, using COP as a kind of a springboard for these discussions. And I found it interesting when researching for this story. I was trying to understand. I know that COP conference finished this week, and I was interested to see what some of the initiatives that were discussed have been and what some of the big talking points that have come out of the conference are. And pretty much all the major stories were about Abdel Fattah and about his hunger strike and this conversation around that. And I thought that was really interesting to see, at least in British media, how much that topic of conversation has dominated. And I do imagine then that having an impact on British holidaymakers considering where to go. I like to think that knowing about a bit more about the country's treatment of protesters, the clampdown on any kind of dissent and abominable human rights record will put people off choosing Egypt as a place to go for their beach holiday.
You seem skeptical, Abdul.
Yeah, I'm very much skeptical because all of this commotion we hear about it, this is all going to be forgotten in a week or so. Alaa Abdel Fattah has been in prison for many, many years. He's not going to go out just because all the media attention was on him. Just like any other issues, the cycle of news is very fast. People are going to forget easily. And this guy is going to be alone in prison again. Just like people don't really care when they go on holiday. The World Cup in 2018 was happening in Russia while Syria was being bombed by Russian forces. And then we saw the head of FIFA playing football with Putin. And all the world leaders going to Russia to take photos with Putin. And that was during Russian forces bombing Syria. A lot of people are now talking about Qatar and all the violations, and they still go. Pretty much all the stadiums, they're going to be fully sold out. Everyone is going to be watching. And what's going to happen? Nothing. All of the commotion, no real action, unfortunately. So that's why I'm very skeptical.
Okay. Arion, I'm coming to you next after this. IG offers a range of investment products, whether you're an active share trader or prefer to have your portfolio managed on your behalf. They want you to be the most informed you can be when investing, so they offer educational resources and tools available 24/7. And with access to over 70 key US stocks outside of normal trading hours and zero commission on US stocks if you trade 3 or more times in the previous month, you're primed to make the best of any opportunity. Note, market liquidity can be lower and spreads wider compared to main session trading. If you want to find out more, search IG Investments. The value of shares, ETFs and ETCs can fall as well as rise, which could mean getting back less than you originally put in. Okay, Arion, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week we learnt that it is actually possible to have too much me time.
Somewhere to go, something to do, and someone to talk to. That's the tagline for Wigan Youth Zone, and the reason why every day up to 200 young people come to the centre.
A couple of years ago, I just wouldn't leave the house. I just would stay at home, away from everyone. But the Youth Zone has given me that many opportunities that now I just keep wanting to come back.
People my age, they might struggle at home and have problems, and it's just that opportunity to get away from it all and make new friends and just do activities what they've never done before.
Anna Youssef reporting for ITV's Granada Reports at Wigan's Youth Zone, as she said last week. Arion, why are you taking us to Wigan? What's the story?
So according to a survey by YouGov and the charity that runs those youth zone locations, it's called Onside, around half of 11 to 18-year-olds spend most of their spare time in their bedrooms, and only 13% of respondents to the survey that Onside conducted said that they saw friends in person in their free time, and meanwhile 19% said that they spent their free time entirely alone. And Onside believes that this lifestyle means that there's a generation that A, isn't meeting new people or developing the qualities necessary for creating successful relationships, and B, is in danger of having their mental well-being damaged. And Catherine Morley, who's Onside's chief executive, had this kind of rallying call saying that it's really important that we don't just stand by and, in her words, watch an entire generation sleepwalking into isolation.
Or C, Kate, just being teenagers. I mean, haven't teenagers always valued time in their bedrooms away from their families?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I was a teenager, enjoyed slamming my door, throwing myself down on the bed in a fit of rage and spending time away from my parents, as many teenagers do. I think that is a normal response. And I think it's worth remembering that if teenagers are choosing to spend time on their own, I think that view should be respected. And I think it's when individuals are kind of forced to spend time on their own because they don't have friends, or because they don't get on with their families, or because they are addicted to gaming, that's when it's a real problem. But if we're just talking about teenagers shutting themselves away in their bedrooms for a few hours after school in the evening to talk to their friends online, I don't really see that as being a huge problem.
Yeah, well, this whole story, Abdul, seems to me to be about where you draw that line between when it's normal, important behavior, teenagers defining themselves, and when it is problematic behavior, teenagers developing social problems and perhaps not developing properly as people. Where do you draw that line? When does this become a problem?
I draw the line when I see it written by a teenager, not written by someone who's not a teenager. And the reason is we do not understand teenagers, because a lot of the time we see them by themselves. They're not by themselves. They're with their friends online. Maybe we're not comfortable being with our friends online. They are comfortable. They are playing video games, PlayStation. My nephew plays PlayStation all the time. He's 16 years old. And he's not alone. He's in his room physically alone, but he's talking to his friend, just like we're talking now in here on this podcast. They like hanging out, on the metaverse or online in virtual reality and doing things we did not like. I remember growing up, and my father would say, you're weird. You're playing video games, PlayStation 1, or Nintendo. And it's like, no, Dad, I'm happy in here playing with my friend next to me. And his idea of having fun was to go out and outdoors, and that didn't damage me. Look, I think I'm just bold.
Well, jury's out. It made you the man you are today, at least. Yes. Functioning. I mean, that's the point, isn't it, Arion? These teenagers will grow into functioning adults, just maybe not functional in the same way current adults are.
Yeah, I mean, I take Abdul's point, and I think there is a danger in older generations being very judgmental about the behaviors of younger generations when, that's just the way things have changed, and people live in different ways depending on, the moment in which they are born and the opportunities that are presented to them, technological or otherwise. And part of this story is the kind of ubiquity of devices, including how many young people own smartphones and all of that. But
Stop being so fair-minded. Tell us we're going to Helena Hancock.
Okay, well, just to push back on that idea a little bit. So, a parenting coach, Natalie Costa, who was cited in this piece by the Times that was really drawing attention to this, she said that there is a lot of important stuff that goes on in face-to-face contact in child development, specifically the way that kids learn to mirror body language, understand tone of voice, and hone their conversational skills. And I appreciate that, that needs to be considered in a new era where we are going to be communicating differently. And, if the metaverse does come to be a real thing, then we're going to need a different skill set to operate in that environment. But I do think that this presents a moment that we can at least stop and consider whether this form of isolation that kids are sometimes subjecting themselves to, sometimes it's just been purely by virtue of the fact that we've lived through this very peculiar couple of years and young people haven't been able to go out so much, whether those impacts are in some positive or whether they're in some negative. And I think this at least, is forcing us to look at it with a critical eye.
Well, forcing is the interesting verb, I think, Kate, because, looking at that piece from ITV, a lot of those kids that were interviewed clearly had sort of been forced out the door by their parents, go to the youth club. And then when they were there, obviously enjoyed it. But it's that feeling of not, at that age, being able necessarily to define for yourself when it is healthy for you to put the technology down. I guess that's the fear.
Yeah, and I think it's also a confidence thing. I think a lot of these young people understandably got out of practice in the pandemic. They were forced to spend years of some of the most important years of their lives at home where they were only communicating with their friends over social media. And I think rebuilding that confidence to go out and socialize in person can be tricky. But we must also remember that these kids are spending around 7 hours a day at school, socializing with other young people, and then they're coming home and then they're shutting their doors. So it's hardly like they're working from home all day as an adult and then spending their whole evening inside the house. I think it's actually probably that generation that we should feel are less socially connected than young people who are spending so much time with other young people because they have to go to school.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it, Abdul? A lot of the generation that are complaining about their children locking themselves upstairs have themselves spent the entire day talking to people only over Zoom and then are worried that their children aren't talking to them, but their kids have had a lot more social interaction.
Yeah, it's all about cultural differences as well. Some younger generations don't want to go to a school face to face. My students, I ask them, I prefer to teach online because it's easier for me, right? I don't have to commute. I don't have to take the metro. And I ask my students, do you enjoy face-to-face or you call it at university? They're university students, having your university life, societies and going out, or do you prefer online classes? They said, nope, online classes are better. We don't need to commute. We don't need to talk to people, pretend that we're friendly. But this is the culture in Asia. But if you look at the culture of Arabic countries, for example, where a lot of girls don't go to school or after school, there's nothing going on. You have to stay home, especially for girls. You're not allowed to go out. You have to stay home. And a lot of girls get married at age, 15, 16, 17, depends on culture where they are. And they spend a lot of time at home. Do we call that isolation? Or is it just we're looking at isolation from a Western perspective in a Western society?
Well, we are looking at it from a Western perspective, but we're concerned about it because there might be anxiety then attached to in-person socializing after that. And, is that the case? In those Arabic countries, do young women get married and then find themselves anxious in real life social situations because they've been stuck at home?
For the newer generation, I don't think so. I think this is the new normal. This is what they enjoy. They enjoy it. They like it. In research in this topic, I found 2 studies actually, but they're dated from 1982 and 1981, and both of them by Larson, 1982, and Broughton 81 psychological papers. And they both said that it's totally normal for teenagers to spend time by themselves because they're discovering themselves. The brain is changing. It's totally fine. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
I take that point, and I do think that there's a moment at which, if teenagers are choosing time alone in those sorts of ways to just pursue their creativity or just, find themselves, then that's okay. But I think that the concern here, and the reason that we were hearing positive things from those two people who were interviewed at the top of this piece, is that there is an actual real world value that people who have otherwise been keeping themselves to themselves feel when they go out and socialize that they maybe didn't even anticipate. And because there is this generation that's a little bit got out of the habit of going out and seeing people face to face, I think if there are virtues to be found in doing that, and most studies suggest that there really genuinely are, then we should re-encourage that behavior so that we don't, as the head of Onside said, end up with this generation that isn't isolated because they're teenagers and that's just what teenagers do. They're isolated because world circumstances pushed them into a thing that is going to be detrimental at the end of the day.
And I guess also they're going to grow up to take grown-up jobs that don't involve just working remotely, Kate. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? In the professional sphere, never mind their social life, they might suddenly find themselves in a chain of command or having to deal with members of the general public in person, having not built up those skills as a teenager.
That's true. But I think the people that I feel most concerned for in terms of having that interaction in the workplace are the people in their early 20s who would have entered the workforce during the pandemic and now potentially are working in jobs which are either full-time or majority remote and didn't have that experience of commuting, of working in an office, of kind of understanding, picking up the kind of individual eccentricities about what it's like to work in an office. In many ways, it's a bit like being at school. You don't pick who you're with. You spend a lot of your hours of the day with these people. You work on projects together. There are a lot of comparisons to be made there. And I think for people who didn't do that in their early 20s, now maybe do it once or twice a week, they might come in and the rest of their team isn't in that day, or a lot of their team might be working full-time remote. I think those skills then probably are lacking a bit. And I do feel like it would then be hard to go from that experience to then working in a job where you are expected to be in the office full time and you perhaps don't understand exactly how to conduct yourself because it's not something that you've experienced firsthand.
Abdul.
Yeah, all these teenagers are now going to when they're adults or they've already started dating, and most of the dating now happens online, right? You're going to be savvy online. Everything's happening on Tinder or OkCupid or whatever dating websites. When was the last time you talked to strangers in the bar? Just to get their numbers, if you're not married or if you're married in secret. Anyway, but when was the last time? It's like,
Abdul, we can include your profile in the show notes.
So it's total. I think the world is changing. So these things are changing. A lot of people are working from home now, more comfortable. These are gonna date. They're gonna be online, enjoy things online. I don't see any harm in this. They're enjoying this. I'm enjoying them giving me more space in public. I'm happy with that.
I mean, either way, I do think that we are going to have to prepare ourselves for a world where people do spend a bit more time on their own. There's this generational thing that's going on where older people divorcing more, they're becoming known as the silver splitters or grey divorcees. Couples that used to stay together for their whole lives are doing that decreasingly. And from the sort of baby boomer generation on, it looks like we're going to have not just, these teens in isolation, but also older people in isolation. So it's not just kind of an issue that's going to affect young people.
My grandma is not comfortable in her solitude. She just hates seeing my children running around her flat, tearing it up and screaming, so she pretends she is. You might think we're done with teenage lifestyles, but we're not. We have another story on that from Kate after this. Okay, Kate, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Tattooing leaving its mark on the mainstream.
The number one reason why I feel like it's a really great idea to wait until you're older to get a tattoo is because when you're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, your body is most likely not done growing yet. And this might seem like, something that's pretty trivial, something that won't matter a whole lot. But I'm gonna tell you what, I have met a lot of clients that are like in their 30s and 40s that have had like a tattoo that was on an area of their body, like let's say for instance the outer like upper arm area, like outside of the bicep area. I've met a lot of clients that have tattoos on that area of their body that when they were younger and they got the tattoo done, it was totally centered and fit perfectly. And then when they got older, the tattoo moved from being in the middle of their arm to being like on the front of their arm.
YouTuber James Withy there, sharing his tattoo tips for teens back in 2018. He makes a good point, Kate, but what's the story?
So this week, my attention was grabbed by an article in the New York Times, which reported that a mum in New York had been arrested after her 10-year-old son got a tattoo of his name in block letters on his arm. And the mum had actually given permission for him to do so, but when the school found out, both the mum and the tattoo artist were arrested. And the paper pointed out that this is just the latest in a series of similar incidents. There was one that occurred in the state of Georgia a couple of years ago when a couple were arrested after they tattooed crosses on 6 of their children who were aged 10 to 17 at the time, and a couple of other incidents that followed similar patterns.
Yeah, so the story in the New York Times was of the tattoo artist Austin Smith, who was unlicensed, and the boy's mother, Crystal Thomas, who was arrested. Do you think, Kate, that's a heavy-handed response? I mean, I know that the law in New York is that you have to be over 18 to get a tattoo, but that isn't the law everywhere, and it's maybe surprising to some that it would literally end with you being arrested when clearly a child has chosen to have a tattoo.
It's a complicated one. I personally do think 10 feels quite young to be making a decision that is likely to last the rest of your life. Obviously, you can get tattoos removed, but it's painful. It's not always possible, depending on the type of tattoo that you get. It can be expensive. And I think 10, it does feel young to be making that decision. And also, we did hear in the clip earlier that when you're young and you're still growing, your skin can expand and stretch. The same can actually happen if you put on or lose weight as well. And that can mean that the tattoo that you like when you're a teenager might look completely different when you're in your 50s. And that's also something to bear in mind as well. It's interesting, though, because not all countries have got ages of consent for tattoos. Some places, I was surprised to see Ireland, I think, doesn't have a legal age requirement, but I believe that you need parental permission. But some other countries have much more lax rules, like the Czech Republic. And even in the US, there's a huge disparity between states about what is permitted and what's not. So in New York, for example, they have the strict over 18 rule, but other states allow children as young as 14 to get tattoos if they have parental consent. And according to the New York Times, some other states like Ohio and West Virginia, they allow it with parental blessing and they don't specify any minimum age requirement.
I mean, I suppose all of this has come into focus, Arion, because as Kate hinted in her intro to the story, it's become more mainstream to have a tattoo generally. You know, there are celebrities of the kind that go beyond kind of hairy biker types that was the case 30 years ago that have tattoos. Now, people of all different ethnicities, genders and ages are on telly and in magazines and on Instagram showing off their tats. So it's become a bigger thing.
Yeah, according to some estimations, nearly half of millennials have tattoos, compared with only 13% of the baby boomer generation. That's according to a 2015 survey by the Harris Poll. So, you know, this is a big leap in the number of people who have tattoos and makes way for my wife's plan, which is to start up a business called Get Your Tats Out, because we do actually have the technology to help people remove their tattoos. It can leave a bit of scarring, but it does seem like with increasing numbers of people getting tattoos in the first place, probably that technology will get better as it goes along. At the same time, there's also been a really profound shift in attitudes. And I think that whereas even 10, 15 years ago, it was probably not quite so acceptable to have tattoos, like visible tattoos in the workplace, I don't think that's the case anymore.
Do you know, I was on phone-in radio a decade ago doing a call-in about I think it was British Airways staff have visible tattoos at check-in. You know, there was a story in the Mail Online or something with people saying it's outrageous that obviously, if someone's got a tear on their eye, it's a slightly different thing. But I mean, you know, it's extraordinary now to think that was just a decade ago that people were concerned about that. I wouldn't think twice if the 30-year-old serving me at British Airways had a tattoo on their arm. It just wouldn't occur to me. But Abdul, as our cultural differences correspondent for today, is that the case all over the world?
Oh, no, that's not the case all over the world. A lot of places, they have tattoos for younger generations or kids or older people, depending on to mark certain events in people's life. And that's, of course, the case with tribes where they mark, you know, tattoos for different certain age, for different activities and different things. But however, when I was reading about this and I was reading about the consent age, I was thinking of tattoos in Syria and how we don't have any laws actually about tattoos in Syria, and a lot of people, you know, have miserable tattoos. I remember the first tattoo I saw in my life. It was one of my friend's brothers, and he says, "My life is miserable," literally on his arm. And this was very, very common in a lot of people, and especially kind of the lower class, you know, teenagers. One of the things that caught my attention in this article is that this young kid that we're talking about who got the tattoo on his arm, he said he got it because his teacher got a tattoo in the same place. And I was like, but by the same logic, teachers drive cars. You should not allow kids, even with the parental permission, to drive cars. So this peer pressure and then parental and parents don't need a license to become parents. So we need laws to protect kids from such parents.
Yes. Okay. So that's a reason to have an age limit. But the thing that I thought when I saw that detail of he was copying his teacher, Kate, goes back to that other thing Abdul was saying about class, really. You know, I think what was lying behind that phone-in I was referring to was the sense that it came from working class culture in this country to have a tattoo, and that therefore, you know, a blue chip brand wouldn't want to be represented that way. That's the wall that's been broken down, isn't it, over the last 10 years? You're now in a situation where your teacher, your middle-class professional, has a tattoo and it's normal.
Yeah, and you hinted at this when you asked Arion a question earlier about the impact of celebrities. And I do think that seeing role models like teachers or celebrities who've got tattoos does then trickle down and influence younger people. I mean, Justin Bieber has got something like 56 tattoos. He's only 28. Ed Sheeran's got more than 60. Rihanna's got about 25. This is according to some really hard-hitting investigative journalism by The Guardian. And I think that all this, you know, these are three of the most popular celebrities around today, especially ones that young people like. And I think that really does help push tattoos more into the mainstream. And I think that the fact that as well it's less frowned upon in an employment setting. I even saw that there was a survey carried out by the Knowledge Academy, which is a UK-based training company, that some companies even prefer employees with a tattoo, especially in the more kind of creative industries, as it shows that they, as tattoos can have this association with creativity and uniqueness. So I think that attitudes have completely shifted, and that's a result of celebrities role modeling, employment settings changing, and also social media, which is something we haven't spoken about yet.
Well, go on then. Let's talk about that.
Well, social media has had a massive impact on the industry. At first, tattooing was a bit of an old boys club, and artists would all kind of start out in the same way, where they get apprenticeships with pre-established shops, and that meant that the same type of people were becoming tattoo artists and others were kind of left out of the industry. But actually, over the last few years, a lot of the most successful tattoo artists have got big, partly because of social media, specifically the more visual platforms like Instagram, and it's completely changed the game. I mean, speaking anecdotally, a couple of my friends have gone and got tattoos because they've really liked the work of a specific tattoo artist that they've seen on social media. Some have even traveled to other countries or cities just to get tattooed or get inked by that specific person. And it's done so much. Social media has done so much in terms of making the world of tattoos more accessible. going into a tattoo parlor, especially if you haven't got any tattoos, can be really intimidating. But social media allows people to kind of immerse themselves in the whole culture long before they actually go through the doors.
And I think there's a virtuous circle that occurs as well where, when there are more people getting tattoos, then there are more people drawn into being tattooists. And it feels as though even in like our lifetimes, tattoos are getting better quality. Like there are better artists doing tattoos out there, and then more people see that level of design that can be put onto your skin, and they want those ones, and then more artists go into that line of work. It just feels like gone are the days of the kind of anchor with mum written over the top of it, and now you can get really beautiful or quite detailed work put on your skin, and it's also not just like the color blue that is put on you. Now, that sort of prison or sailor type tat is the thing of the past. Now you can get really beautiful artwork.
I might go and get a tattoo of a virtuous circle. I have to ask before I leave you, who here has a tattoo? I have my own private suspicions, but can we just go round the table? Arion, do you have a tattoo?
I do not. Does that align with your private suspicion?
I'll let you know at the end. Okay. Abdul.
This is going to be my tattoo, so already paid for the design. It's
So Abdul's just shown us a picture of a teddy bear floating up to heaven with a halo around its head and wings. I'm guessing that you're joking, but I'm not 100% sure.
No, I'm serious. I'm getting this next year.
You're doing that. Where are you going to... On what part of your body and why?
It's going to be on my forearm. And just like Kate said, I saw this tattoo artist in mainland China, and I liked their work so much. And I said, design me one. And they said, what do you like? So I talked a little bit, and they said...
And you said, what? Hello, Panda?
And they said, yeah, sure, this is for you. And I already paid for it. So I'm just waiting for the borders to open up, and then I'm going to cross and go there.
That's amazing. Okay. And Kate, do you have a tattoo?
I'm really curious to know what your suspicion is, but I don't have a tattoo.
Oh.
And it's not because I'm morally opposed to the idea or anything like that. I think they can look really amazing. But the real reason is because I have a very low pain threshold. I have got red hair. The two things are linked. There are studies to prove it. And I'm just terrified of the pain. Although I did read a report in People magazine that said celebrities these days get their tattoos done under anaesthetic. So maybe that's something I could consider.
Okay. But I had thought that it would be no from Arion, maybe from Abdul, and yes from Kate. So I was kind of half right. My thanks to all three of you. You can follow this show for free, whether or not you've got your tats out, and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped. Wherever you get your podcast, just tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.